Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. I wanted to do this brief video as an introduction to the Bhagavad Gita and also to the Mahabharata. Uh, we're going to be starting our Bhagavad Gita study group pretty quick here in Austin for the Vedic Satsang ATX. And it occurred to me as I was reviewing some of the backstory that it might be a lot and might take a little bit of time out of the ability to go into the chapter, and maybe not everyone wants to read all of the introduction. So I have these slides from an old lecture I gave many years ago at a yoga studio teacher training, and I thought I would try to go through them in order to save some time within the actual meeting itself. So this is just for your edification. If you don't want to, if you want a little more detail in terms of the backstory, and again, I am going to be having some movie nights, or I'm having in coordination with some of the local yoga studios to play the Mahabharata movie here locally. But obviously, not everyone or most people are probably not going to want to attend that. So I wanted to do this instead to try to make this easier for everyone. So with that said, it's about 18 or so slides. So let's get started. So first of all, sometimes people may be wondering why study the Bhagavad Gita at all. And I would like to, especially the Westerners who are maybe not as familiar with it, to help you understand that the Bhagavad Gita has been hugely influential in the West, actually. People like Henry David Thoreau, Oppenheimer, who we're all a lot more familiar with now because of the movie, Aldous Huxley, who was a philosopher who wrote the Perennial Philosophy and other works of literature, Doors of Perception, things like that. Albert Einstein, and then of course Mohandas K. Gandhi. The Bhagavad Gita has been hugely influential in a lot of our thought leaders in the last 150 years. And so I think even if you are at the end of the day not necessarily highly interested in the spiritual aspect of things, I think just being well read and knowing the Bhagavad Gita and will help you understand India and Indian culture and Hindu culture in particularly much more thoroughly than you would otherwise. I won't read these quotes to you. I think you all can pause it and read them as needed. So just as sort of the bigger picture here, the Bhagavad Gita, there's three big books that are really kind of part and parcel, or the kind of the core of Hindu philosophy. They're called the Prasthanatraya, those core texts. The main ones being the Upanishads. The Upanishads are kind of revealed information from the ancient seers or rishis, but they're not necessarily structured in any particular other way. There's a series of stories or anecdotes, things like that. The Brahma Sutras are commentary on the Upanishads, and they're very deep and they're very complicated, and they hurt my head and they hurt most people who reads them's heads. So they're not generally accessible to the majority of people. And then lastly, there's the Bhagavad Gita, which is really written in a sense as a summary of those other things for the everyday man who is more of the householder, the non-monastic, who's trying to live their life and needs a handbook in a sense of how to live life. So one of the common misconceptions is the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavad Gita naturally is an extension of that because the Gita is part of the Mahabharata. Is really not about actual war, at least in the current symbolic sense of it. Yes, the story itself does involve that, naturally the external story, but when we're trying to reflect on the internal story, it's really more about that struggle within us. And as part of that, so Hinduism or Hindu culture historically has had sort of four main goals of life. One being kama, which is desire. Artha is going to be achievement. You want to make something of yourself and build wealth and prosperity and all that as part of your life. Dharma being basically sort of innate to who you are. People will translate it as duty, higher thinking, righteousness. There's really, as often as stated, there's not really a one-to-one translation for any English word. And then finally, all of this is ideally to culminate into moksha or liberation. And the liberation obviously being the ability to be free either during this lifetime or once we pass from the body and not have to be reborn again. So that's the highest aim of Hindu philosophy, and that's whether you're going through the Bhagavad Gita, Advaita Vedanta route, whether you're doing it through more of a devotional route like ISKCON or some of those guys, although they interpret it differently, or even if it's just a matter of through the yogic path, with the Yoga Sutras and so forth. So they're all talking about this as sort of the goal, in a sense, of life. So the Mahabharata, let's get into that, because this is really the backdrop of the Bhagavad Gita and the main reason why I wanted to talk and have this video. So there are two major epics within the Indian sort of pantheon, so to speak. There are Puranas, which are stories of various gods and goddesses. And then there's something called the Itihasas, which are like the historical documents, of which the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are two. The Ramayana is the story of Rama and Sita and Hanuman, and that precedes the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata comes much, much later. It's still a long time ago, but this is now more so involving as part and parcel of the story of Krishna, who is a later avatar or incarnation of Vishnu, who is the preserver god within sort of the Hindu trinity of manifestations of higher gods. It was written by a very famous sage Vyasa. He is also the compiler of the Vedas. He is the author of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the story of all of Krishna's sort of childhood antics and leelas, as they say, and then the Mahabharata itself and other works as well. It's extremely long. They say it's longer than both the Iliad and the Odyssey combined, and 6 to 8 times longer than that combo. So again, it's very, very hard to get through all the nuances of the story. And so we're going to be doing a slash job here in the summary, but at least get you to the basics, and you can always go deeper if you need to. Ultimately, the Mahabharata is about a fratricidal war between two sets of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, who are both claiming to be the rightful heirs to a massive kingdom and is roughly now kind of Delhi. The Kauravas are 100 brothers, and they are the blind king sons of Dhritarashtra, and the Pandavas are 5 brothers and the sons of Pandu, hence their name. It's a very complicated backstory, so even this is going to seem like a lot, but this is the simplistic version of it. Once upon a time, there was this ancient king named Sanatu. He marries this beautiful woman who basically he falls in love with. She is ultimately one by one sacrificing their children in the Ganges River. And he's not allowed to really ask her as to why. That's sort of the condition for her marrying him. But after seeing this so much, he can't take it anymore. He ultimately asks, and she doesn't sacrifice the last son, reveals herself as Ganga Devi, Mother Ganges, and disappears. His son is then Bhishma, which means one of a firm vow. And so Bhishma would be the rightful heir to the kingdom. However, Bhishma's father, King Sanatu, falls in love with another poor woman, Satyavati, who is a poor fairy woman, kind of fisher person, a lower class woman, and he falls in love with her, and but he's not allowed to because his father is, worried that she's going to basically be second class, and Bhishma's kids would ultimately run the throne, and so as a condition of the marriage, he makes him promise that basically Bhishma won't have any kids. So Bhishma agrees to do that to make his father happy, but ultimately her sons aren't able to have any kids. And so now the king has no lineage if Bhishma doesn't have any child. But he won't break his vow. He made his vow and he's very strict with that. And so they're in a bit of a bind. So Vyasa, who is the author of the story, and also happens to be Satyavati's firstborn, but he is also a monk. And he is asked to therefore perform the duties of fathering the children with these various princesses in order to carry on the lineage of the family. Now, he agrees to do so, but due to the reaction of the women, they have various sons. One of them, because he's so gross looking, she closes her eyes, and ultimately her son is born blind, and that's Dhritarashtra. One went pale at looking at him, and so her son is very pale in color, and that was Pandu. And then they also had a third with one of the handmaidens, and his name was Vidura. But because he was not of royal lineage in that sense, he was never really set to be in the lineage of taking over the kingdom. So this presents a problem. Dhritarashtra, although he's the eldest son, due to his blindness, isn't going to be able to become the king. And so therefore Pandu, the younger brother, is going to be heir to the throne. So they're living their life. Everything is going fine. But as fate turns out, Pandu is out hunting. He kills a deer who turns out to be a priest in disguise and gets cursed. And basically, the priest curses him to say if he ever makes love to either of his wives, then he will die in that process. So he's in a bit of a bind because now he has no functional heirs. And so it's almost as if the story is going to start over again. So he, knowing that he can't have sons, he and his wives ultimately leave the kingdom and now leave the kingdom back to his elder blind brother to more or less run the place. While they're in the forest, Kunti, his older wife, reveals she has a secret power that she was given as a young girl where she can ultimately say a mantra and summon a god and have basically a child with one of the gods. When she was a young girl, she had tested the power out with the sun god, Surya, had a son who was named Karna, who does play into the story much later, but it's a side story and really beyond the scope of this video, who she puts in a basket, very Moses-like, and ultimately floats down the river, and he is raised as a charioteer being very symbolic of sort of a lower class, working class sort of individual, and certainly not of royal lineage. So she reveals that she has this power to Pandu, and in his excitement, he asks her to give him some heirs. So she does so, and she has one son with Dharma, who is sort of the embodiment of Dharma, and so the eldest is Yudhishthira. The son with wind is Vayu, and then his name is Bhima. And then the king of the gods, Indra, has a son named Arjuna. And Arjuna is going to play very heavily into the story, and he is the main protagonist, so to speak, along with Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and that dialogue happens with him. She also teaches the mantra to Pandu's other younger wife. She has a set of twins by these twin gods named Nakula and Sahadeva, who are sort of the embodiment of intelligence and beauty for men. And so the five brothers collectively become the Pandava brothers, and they are the heroes of the epic for our story. Meanwhile, the blind king marries a very beautiful princess named Gandhari, but she was, in a certain sense, she was blindsided, pun intended, and was not informed that he was blind until she had agreed to the marriage. So she, therefore, as part of that, willingly puts a blindfold on her eyes and ultimately it remains blind herself. And this is very symbolic that he is born blind and she is willfully and intentionally blind, not only physically but spiritually as things progress in the story. So she eventually does have a pregnancy. It doesn't go terribly well. It ultimately, she delivers this large flesh ball, which has to be cut up into 100 pieces and kind of incubated into various oils and things like that. Doesn't really matter. And these 100 pieces ultimately become the 100 sons known as the Kauravas. And almost all of the sons have some sort of dur or a dr, these sort of names, almost all with evil connotations within them. So the story progresses. Pandu, one day, being the spry young king that he is overcome with passion and insists on making love with his younger wife Madri, who ultimately, as part of that, as per the curse, he does die in that process. And then Madri ultimately performs sati, which is where the woman would throw herself into the funeral pyre as he dies, or as he is dead, as he's getting cremated. And so this now leaves Kunti to fend for all the 5 sons all by herself. Clearly, she's not going to be able to do this out in the forest, so she and the 5 boys have to move back to the main palace, the kingdom, and live under the auspices of Dhritarashtra. So again, Dhritarashtra being the eldest blind brother. So now you've got the 5 Pandava brothers, the 100 Kaurava brothers, young men growing up within the kingdom, and they are being taught by Bhishma, their sort of grand uncle, collectively in the arts of war and the Kshatriya lifestyle, that sort of warrior king lifestyle for their future training. And there's other acharyas or teachers, Drona and others, that are there to also teach all of the boys. But ultimately, as expected, there's a massive amount of competition between all of them. So there's a lot of stories, and again, way beyond this video, but ultimately there's multiple attempts of the Kauravas to either kick out or trick the Pandavas out of their kingdom, which is going to eventually lead up to the eventual need for the war. There is a final very famous scene where Yudhishthira, the eldest brother, although he is supposed to be the embodiment of dharma and righteousness, he does have a weakness for gambling, and they know that, and he's terrible at it to boot. And so as a result, they challenge him to a game of dice, which is a fixed game of dice, and ultimately he loses everything, including all the kingdom, and he enslaves them all, including their collective wife named Draupadi. As part of the insult for Draupadi, they drag her into the king's court in order to disrobe her, to put her basically into slave clothes, and to embarrass her by disrobing her in the kingdom court. And as a result of that, there's a miracle where she prays to Krishna. Her sari is sort of unlimited fabric, and she is never unclothed. However, due to the poor unrighteousness of that act, she is given several boons by the king again, in which she is able to secure their freedom. And so they're going to leave. But again, they challenge Yudhishthira to one more game, and predictably he plays and loses. And so the caveat of that game is that they have to go into the forest for 13 years and live incognito, and then at which time, and when they come back, they can get their kingdom back. But of course, the Kauravas have no intention of returning the kingdom back to them, and so this is the setup for the war. In a parallel story, where does this bring Krishna? Because he's the other part of the Bhagavad Gita. He's living nearby. He is the son of Vasudeva, who is Kunti's brother, and therefore he is the Pandavas' cousin. He is meanwhile having his own sets of trials and tribulations and adventures by his own uncle, who is trying to kill him due to a curse that happened before he was born. And these are all laid out in large detail through, again, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a great story. And these are the stories that many will be familiar with, of Krishna dancing with or playing with the various cowherd girls, the gopis, stealing butter, killing various demons, things like this. You'll see a lot of this, especially if you go to some of the more Chaitanya, Bhakti, ISKCON kind of groups. You'll see pictures of this all over the place, and they're great stories, and certainly very devotional in that regard. So everything is starting to culminate. They are now choosing sides. Various kingdoms are choosing sides as it comes clear that everyone's going to have to go to war. And prior to the war, Krishna is laying down in his room, his tent, I can't remember exactly. Duryodhana, the leader of the Kaurava brothers, comes and sits at Krishna's head. Arjuna then comes in secondarily, sits at Krishna's feet, and this is all very symbolic naturally. And Krishna wakes up and says, "Oh, hey," and he sees Arjuna first. And so because of that, Duryodhana is like, "Well, hey, I was here first, I get first choice." But Krishna's like, "Well, I saw Arjuna first," and he obviously wants to give Arjuna first choice because he respects him more. And the caveat is either Krishna will act as a charioteer but not fight, or the other would be that they get all of Krishna's entirety of his armies. He has his own kingdom, his own armies, the whole thing. And Arjuna requests that Krishna be his charioteer. And then Duryodhana is quite pleased with this and says, hey, that's wonderful. I get all of your armies. Love it. Love it. So everyone's happy. And so this is how Krishna then becomes part of the fight. So as the two armies are lining up on the Kurukshetra battlefield, or the Dharmakshetra battlefield, the battlefield where these guys are going to fight, it becomes very clear the Pandavas are severely outnumbered. And so they are getting ready to go, kind of like the old-fashioned movies we always see. But unfortunately, a lot of the elders of the family are fighting on the side of the Kauravas because they feel obligated, because all of those years they've lived under the tutelage of the kingdom, of the king, eating their food, staying in their places. So even though ultimately they know they're not in the right, they're bound by sort of this kind of perverted duty to the kingdom. And so they ultimately are going to fight against the righteous Pandava brothers. And so this is sort of the setup for the Gita. So before the battle begins, Arjuna then requests Krishna to drive the chariot down into the middle, kind of the no man's land between the two battlefields, or on the battlefield, so he can survey the opposing army. And so as he sees his cousins, his relatives, his elder teachers, the people who made him who he is, he starts to have doubts. He starts to get attached. He starts to have second guesses, even though this is his dharma, even though this is who he is. He starts to get these doubts, and this is then the setup for the story that's going to proceed with the Gita. And then ultimately there is divine vision given to the author of the Gita, whose name is Sanjaya, and he is relaying what's happening to the blind king Dhritarashtra. And this is what we're reading, is ultimately Sanjaya narrating the Gita to him. In the interest, there is a great, I don't know if this will play on this recording, there's a lot of great AI videos that guys are putting out. I wish I could play this. I'm sure YouTube would flag it, but I want to see if I can try playing it. I'm not sure if it will, just enough so you can see. I would encourage you. This is a fantastic sort of trailer of it. No, it's not playing. All right. There's a lot of great AI going out. I'm really hopeful that these guys over in India are going to make some amazing trailers for the Mahabharata movie, because a lot of the stuff that's out there is kind of bad CGI and kind of corny. All right. So just to quickly get into the symbolism, just a few more slides. So the Kurukshetra, the Dharmakshetra, is ultimately the battle of the human mind. We face these difficulties because we have free will, we have choice. So these guys on the bad guys' side, the Kaurava side, are just entirely sort of simplistically bad in the story. And then even some of the Pandavas are kind of unthinkingly good, where they're very dogmatic and they're very sort of unthinking, whereas Arjuna's somewhere in the middle. He's like us. We're questioning these things. We're sort of the bridge between those two things. We're not wholly good and we're not wholly bad, and we're going between sort of these polarities, sort of like the proverbial angel and the devil on our shoulders. And so therein Arjuna is the protagonist that represents all of us. The symbolism of the chariot itself is pretty much lifted almost directly from the Katha Upanishad, where the chariot pieces are, the 5 horses are the 5 senses, the reins on the horses are the mind, the charioteer, in the Katha Upanishad it's the intellect, but in this, the charioteer being Krishna is going to be the higher self. And then Arjuna is sort of symbolic of the individualized soul, the everyman, in that sense. And so ultimately this, the Katha Upanishad, again, not probably terribly important, is a dialogue of a young boy, Nachiketas, with Yama, the king of death, as he wants to know sort of the secrets of what happens after death and kind of the nature of life. So anyway, not critical to know the Katha Upanishad for this, but this is where it comes from. So again, this Arjuna's reluctance to fight the looming battle in many ways is symbolic of, all of us. We want a life free of conflict. How many times we all say, I just want peace, right? We all get to a point where, we just want peace in our life, and Arjuna wants to run away. And unfortunately, we can't run away from this battle even if we want to. We can delay it, but we can never get rid of it. And so basically, Krishna now is prompting Arjuna and all of us to fight this fight, to fight for us to get up, to heed to the higher call for within us, to listen to our higher tendencies, to fight against our lower tendencies, and ultimately gain victory and ideally liberation from this wheel of birth and death that is ultimately the gain of Hindu thought. So there are 18 chapters in the Gita. They'll divide them roughly into thirds. Different interpretations will talk to them differently. The individual, the Lord, the identification of those two things, or they'll say tat, tvam, and asi, which is an old Mahavakya from the Upanishads, which means thou, you are that kind of thing. So different people will talk about this in various transliterations and so forth. But roughly you can think of it as 3/3. So kind of helps break it up mentally. So that brings us to the end of that. I'm going to stop here, and that'll bring us to chapter 1. So hopefully that was helpful. It's a little longer than I hoped, but I did want to cut this out of the meeting itself and give you some backdrop just in case. So looking forward to having you guys join us, and we'll see you soon. Hariom.